And joining us right now, Eli Lake, columnist for Bloomberg View. You just heard Bill Thompson, top of the news hour, talk about a development between Russia and Ukraine and a peace process that they're agreeing to. Want to get to that in a minute, Eli, but I understand you were just in Iraq. You had your boots on the ground in Iraq,
I sure did.
Eli. Given your firsthand experience as to what things are looking like in Iraq, and you just heard the president make his case yesterday for an authorization from Congress to use force, what's the situation where it stands now?
Well, as I wrote, I think one of the real dangers is that because there isn't much of a U.S. presence on the ground, and because I think that the U.S. really took too much of a hands-off approach in Iraq and for too long, the result has been a pretty terrible choice, which is that in order to stop the advance of the Islamic State, let's just stop beating around the bush. The United States is effectively aligned indirectly with Iran. And what that specifically means is that the Iraqi security forces, the army in Iraq that we helped train, as everybody knows, it crumbled in June in both Kirkuk and Mosul. And as a result, Iranian-backed and Iranian-supplied militias, Shiite militias, these confessional groups, many of whom have blood on their hands of American soldiers, have filled the security void. And what I found while I was in Iraq is that the chain of command is such that in places like Diyala, where the fighting has been very heavy in recent weeks, the real commander is the Shia militia commanders, not the Iraqi generals. And that means that when we provide airstrikes in coordination with that, we're effectively working with Iran's proxy.
Wow. And I think that you said it in such a jarring way, Eli, that basically de facto we are aligned with Iran right now. That's jarring for the American people to hear, but since you were just in Iraq, the man on the street in Iraq, they still see Iran as a bitter, hated enemy after that horrible war that they went through with them. Do they see it that way as well?
Well, that was back in the day, but I interviewed, Shia militia fighters who fought in that war for Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and they are now in the Badr. I interviewed people in what's called the Badr organization, an organization that has extraordinarily close ties with Iran. And when I asked that question, the answer I got was, what are we supposed to do? We're fighting ISIS right now.
Yeah, so it's the enemy of my enemy. Yeah.
Well, and they have to. And the other thing I would just say is that the last time I was in Iraq, at the very end of 2009, when I was there at the end of 2009, I did not see posters of Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei in Baghdad and other places. You see it all over the place now.
Ooh.
That is extremely significant.
Wow.
I mean, I think that that's a very deliberate sign of anything that shows that the Iranians are really taking over in a way that they hadn't before.
All right, Eli, let me turn to the fact that the president has sent up a request for authorization to use military force to the Congress. It's going to be a war powers discussion up on Capitol Hill, and the language that seems to be sort of at the focus of all this is this line: no enduring ground combat operations. That seems a little vague. Do you know what that means?
Well, first of all, I don't know what it means. And second of all, this entire debate is an insult to our democracy. I mean, if it's a war authorization, if it's an authorization for the use of force, and we've been using force for half a year now, then it's not much of an authorization, is it? It's I don't know what it is. It's an exercise. What is it? An IOU check?
Well,
I mean, it's just.
How different is it? I mean, listen, Congress gave President Bush authorization to use force against Iraq. It wasn't a formal declaration of war, but isn't that the same thing?
No, but I'm saying the president has been using force against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq now since September, and really actually since August. Originally, he justified it because inherently, as the commander-in-chief, the Constitution says he has the power to head the army, and then he uses those Article II authorities to protect the country and protect U.S. interests and so forth. Lots of presidents have said that before. Fine, even though he campaigned against that kind of broad interpretation of constitutional wartime authorities. Then he said the 2001 authorization for the use of force against al-Qaeda, or the people responsible for 9/11, gave him the authority to do that. The only problem was the target in this new campaign, ISIS, is also fighting from time to time al-Qaeda's franchises. There was a very real split. It was all over the news between the organizations. So that kind of that beggars, I don't know, that raises a lot of questions. So he needed if he didn't want to rely on the sort of Cheney interpretation of the Constitution that said, okay, I can do it because I'm the president and we're at war and this is what we have to do, then he needed an authorization for the use of force. But he's asking for one, 5-6 months into the fighting.
But don't you think? I mean, I actually disagree with you on this, Eli. I think it's a good conversation for Congress and the people to have. I think if he is going to go forward, that Congress ought to weigh in on this matter. That's sort of the way it ought to be. Isn't it a healthy discussion to have?
I agree. It is a healthy discussion to have. But if it is to have any meaning, then he can't ask for the permission after he's gone ahead and done it and asserted that he had the authority.
Right.
It's a little bit like when he asked Congress for the authority to go into Syria in a speech in which he said, but I don't need your permission. I mean, either these things matter, either they're real authorizations for the use of force, or they're not. But you can't have, I think the president, and in some ways Congress, but really the president, is looking to have it both ways.
Yeah, good point, Eli. Listen, the other big story today that many people will be talking about is Vladimir Putin's announcement that there is now a roadmap to peace, and they've settled things in Ukraine. Have you had a chance to look at it, and is it that simple?
I haven't had a chance to look at the details, but let me just say this, okay? This is the new normal. We're going to have these little ceasefire agreements every few months, and then his proxies are going to push the boundary and push the envelope, and then I guess what are we going to have, another peace conference and another deal? I mean, Putin is playing us for the suckers that we are. And sadly, this is also the new normal as he changes the boundaries in Europe and what used to be the Soviet Union. And we respond, even though I think the sanctions were pretty robust, they've proven that they're not enough to deter his expansionism.
All right.
Oh, and Eli, while I've got you, everyone's still talking about this speech scheduled March 3rd, I think, for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
Now we're hearing from the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Now, it's not the caucus themselves. They haven't made an official proclamation, but most of the members are saying Netanyahu coming here and giving this speech is disrespectful to our president, and therefore we don't want our president to be disrespected, so we won't show up. And now throwing a racial element into it, unfortunately. How is this going to pan out, and is this actually going to end up hurting Netanyahu and Republicans in the long run?
I think Netanyahu is going to get reelected on this.
Really?
I think he's got a conflict with Obama. Obama's not popular in Israel. And it's a way for Netanyahu to make the case that he's strong enough to stand up to a president who's not as friendly as past U.S. presidents to Israel.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a chance, though, that you're seeing rifts that I think have been in the background for some time coming out now in the open. That's extraordinary to hear from the Congressional Black Caucus, which for the most part has been pretty supportive of Israel over the years.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, I don't think I don't know. We'll see if that's something that's going to last.
Hillary Clinton's going to be in town. Don't you think John Boehner should invite her?
Did you see the Emergency Committee for Israel, Bill Kristol's group, send her a note saying anything we can do to help you attend this?
I didn't see that. That's great.
All right. Eli, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Eli Lake, Bloomberg View.